I'm very passionate about this topic, and we're going to see some of the very fascinating insights and connections, as well as the parallels between our Indian history and Indian culture, and some of the fundamental values that drove some of the successes in the past, and how it is connected even today in the entrepreneurial world, even in the most cutting-edge technology businesses. Let me start out by giving you three different examples. And I picked up, by the way, a movie example, Bombay being the movie capital here, and I'm sure all of you love to watch movies. How many of you watched the Matrix movie? Cool. So we all being nerds, Matrix, we all love that. And so I throw it here, even though the topic was more about connecting some of the great entrepreneurs, like Steve Jobs, and then for our topic here, Arjun, who was the main character, the commander-in-chief of the Pandava clan. He's our CEO here, and we're going to see some of the interesting, striking parallels between Arjun and Steve Jobs. So, how many of you read Steve Jobs' biography? So, page 48 was the most interesting part for me, and that's where Steve Jobs talks about is really the core of his creativity, or what he really values the most in terms of how he comes up with some of the greatest ideas. And he talks about this thing called pragna, and that's a Sanskrit word. What pragna really means, and he specifically used this word. There's no real direct English translation for it, because most of the Sanskrit words are very, very complex and compounded with strong meaning. But really, pragna is the intuitive wisdom, and he compares that. The easier way to explain what pragna or intuitive wisdom is, that when you compare it with intellect, that we all understand. And he's said several times, and even in the book, that the intuition is one of the most powerful. I don't know if you can read here, but it's a very powerful thing. And he says that it's more powerful than even the intellect. And he relied very much on that intuitive nature. We've seen several other instances, and even how he developed some of the best products, where he actually didn't listen to the mind or the intellect that gives you all kinds of the outside external data, or even the focus groups and what the customer wants. In fact, he went on record saying that the customer doesn't know what they want. In fact, he knows from inside that what really the customer wants. Now, take this word pragna, that's really the source of creativity, and flash back, or into 5,000 years back. Our CEO Arjun had the same question, and he talked about pragna too. So in 2.54, in the verse, he talks about sthita pragna kaka bhasha. What it means is that he's asking the question to his mentor that, what is this pragna? And sthita means, fixed. How do I achieve a very fixed level of this wisdom, this intuitive wisdom? Because he realized that that is the core, that is the source of all the creativity. So interesting parallel between, 5,000 years apart, Arjun from Mahabharat and, Steve Jobs here, they're both coming down to the exact same one core thing, which is pragna. And what exactly is that, right? It's really something that we all know from inside. So think for a minute that all of us knows exactly what we have to do, and everybody on the planet knows exactly what they should be doing. In fact, if we really stop the noise from outside and listen to the inner voice, it would tell us that exactly what we want to do. I think some of us, we want to be a great artist, we want to paint something, some of us want to be a great musician, some of us wants to go and work for a non-profit, some of us wants to go and help and teach kids who are out on the street and not getting good education. Some of us wants to go to Africa and help people get clean water. These are all the right causes, they're all the right things. We all know in the heart of the heart that we want to do all these things, but most of the time we can't do that, right? We don't do that. And the reason is that this is an intuitive voice that is telling us that exactly what we want to do. Every person knows what he wants to do, or what he has to do, what is the purpose, but most of the time it remains very much covered, it remains submerged inside, and it has layers of our mind that is just building up, and the layers of mind just constantly keeps us busy in doing things like, the daily routine life, like we wake up, get your breakfast, go to work, do whatever work, and come home, entertainment, go to sleep, come back. It's like the same Groundhog Day situation day after day. And time goes on, but the real inside creativity or some of the things that we really, really want to do and we exactly know what is our purpose never gets done, right? And there's throughout, Steve Jobs' lifetime that you can see that, he kind of shut down some of that mental noise and was able to really connect to that inner voice. This is a nice dialogue between Neo and Morpheus in Matrix, if you remember, and I actually read here because he exactly explains, because he says that, look, this is something that is inexplicable, right? The prajna is really comes from your spirit inside, and that's not a material thing. It's not a matter. It's not physical. So it is very difficult to explain. So he says it very nicely. He says, look, you are here because you know something. What you know, you can't explain, right? So this is something that you can't explain. You felt it your entire life. There is something wrong with the world. So we all know, right, what is wrong with the world. Each and every person knows what is wrong with the world. And we want to do something to fix the world, right? But we can't. We don't do it because we will find the enemy. So the other thing is that why this prajna is so important, because if you think about it, that this whole world is a matter, right? So it's material, including our body and our mind, and it's all matter. And in creating something new from an entrepreneurial standpoint, when you want to create something new, you have to bend matter, right? You have to bend material reality, the form of time and space. And the only way to bend matter is you can't bend matter with matter, right? A knife can't cut itself. A knife can cut anything else, but a knife cannot cut a knife. Same thing, my eyes can see everything, but my eye cannot see its own eye, right? So same thing, if you want to bring a change to the material world, matter cannot bring change to matter. And that's why the spirit is required. So even the reality is that even though, whether we know it or not, the change that is happening or any new creation that is happening or creativity that is coming out of any individual, it is actually coming subconsciously, it is coming out of the prajna. We all have it. We all have that source of creativity. We all have that infinite source of creativity that even Steve Jobs had. There's no difference between great people who have done fantastic creativity in the world, whether it's Picasso or whether it's Steve Jobs, and that level of creativity and what we have. We all have exactly the same. The only difference is that they have A, realized that force within, and B, they've figured out how to access it. The 98% of the people, even though they have it, but they have not realized that they have that creativity, that source of creativity. And B, even if they've realized, they have not figured out how to actually access it. And we'll talk a little bit about, both the things. So why most people have not realized it? Because obviously, just like many great things, many beautiful things out there, it's hidden, right? It's like this jewel, right, which is hidden in the shell. The same thing, the spirit is covered and hidden by the matter, by the body, the mind, the intellect, and all of that. And so the mind brings you all those three things, whether it's the fear, the ego, and the beliefs. So whenever you want to do something really radically creative things, like you want to start a new business, or you want to build some beautiful product, or whatever you want to do, what's going to happen is that it's your mind, it's going to come back with all kinds of fear and say, no, you can't start this business because what about this mortgage, or what about this salary, or how are you going to pay the bills? That is going to be a certain belief system that will kick in and say, no, this won't work, that won't work. So there are all these past beliefs comes in, and then obviously certain ego comes in where, you have obviously let go of the ego and be your real self in order to create something new. So if you think about this, that the mind's layer of this ego, beliefs, and fear are the real enemy that is holding and the source of that creativity, that prajna, imprisoned inside us. And the folks who have been able to access that are the ones who have been able to free their mind. So, and same thing now, so we're talking about the modern psychology in business and entrepreneurship, but even going back 5,000 years, Arjun had exactly the same situation. He figured out that his enemy is within. The whole Mahabharat war, he realized that, the enemy is not outside, but the enemy is within. And that's where he's asking this question, and he's saying that, look, I'm willing to completely die. In 2.46, he tells his mentor, I'm willing to die, right? But, I don't want to fight with my own self, right? Because nobody wants to fight with their own self. So it's like a little kid, if you tell a 7-year-old or 8-year-old who really loves to play video games or who wants to wake up late in the morning and miss school or something like that, and if you tell him that, you have a change, And it's hard for him to sometimes change, because what it means is it's fighting with his own nature, right? And fighting with your own nature is very, very hard. Uh, Whether it's people like alcoholics, who drink alcohol, and they all know in their heart that alcohol is bad. They shouldn't be drinking. So their prajna is telling them what's right and what's wrong, what they should be doing, what they shouldn't be doing, but they will still drink. They'll tell you great words of wisdom that they shouldn't be drinking, but they will still, right? So the enemy is within. That's the key insight. And you see this, that how do you free this? And again, nice sequel from the Matrix movie, and where Morpheus tells Neo about that. Hey, I'm trying to free your mind, right? And if you have to let it all go, the fear, the doubt, and the disbelief, right? So this is exactly what the whole Matrix was, because it is about getting out of your own nature, because our own nature and our own personality defects are holding us back, and they are keeping, the finite nature and the finite body and the mind is holding back our ability to access our infinite creativity and infinite spirit. So again, 2.45, and you see the freeing your mind concept that we saw in the Matrix, or we see out in the modern psychology where all the business people are talking about. Same thing, 5,000 years back, we see in 2.45, Arjun's mentor is advising him the same thing. He's saying in 2.45 that, oh, Arjuna, you have to free your mind, from the three gunas, which is the three different levels of thoughts, right? Which is the tamas, the rajas, and the sattva, right? The three different levels of thoughts. And I'm sure some of you might have read Gita and knows about it. And what he says, that in order to access the spirit inside, that source of creativity, you will have to transcend these three layers of your mind. If you can't transcend, you can't access it. The another way of looking at the same thing of the spirit versus matter is real versus unreal, right? So if you understand, in 2.16 talks about what is real and what is unreal, and when you start analyzing in your mind that what are the real things, right? And real things are the one that stays permanent, and unreal are the things which constantly changes. So if you depend on something and it changes next day, then that's unreal from a metaphysical standpoint, right? And that's what this thing is, that the unreal, obviously my pronunciation of Sanskrit is not so good, so I'm not going to pronounce that, but the English translation says the unreal has no being, but there is no non-being of the real. By the way, the movie had a great dialogue too. So Neo is asking, this isn't real, and Morpheus is saying, what is real? How do you define real, right? If you're talking about your senses, what you feel, taste, smell, or see, then all you're talking about are electrical signals interpreted by the brain. So actually, all this activity that we see in the material world, which we are sensing it through our 5 different senses, these are all nothing but electrical inputs going into the brain. So the reality is that if you know about the virtual reality setup, right? So the technology for virtual reality, and it can exactly simulate this exact same thing of taking different sensory inputs and then manipulate the brain. Then this whole world can look like a hologram, and we are all props which are just acting as humanoids, just they show in the Matrix movie. And this whole world is basically nothing but an illusion, because it is virtual reality, right? And so this world becomes unreal. So then what is real? And so that's another way to kind of try to understand that how to not get caught up, because the way to really connect to the inner prajna is to ability to discard what is unreal. And so if you understand this from even a physics standpoint, and by the way, there was a great program called NOAA. It's running on the US TV channels, which is funded hundreds of millions of dollars. And if you can find some video clips on YouTube, and there are some great researchers in astronomy and in cosmology, and also in quantum physics, and the most cutting edge research. In fact, professors from Stanford University talks about how this whole universe may be actually just a hologram, a 3D projection from something that is real outside the universe. And this is really the actual research coming out from cutting edge universities, and it matches exactly with what we are hearing in 2.16 of this book about real versus the unreal. So finally, if you see both the CEOs that we have, which is Arjun, had the same question, and Steve Jobs had the same question. should I follow my mind or should I follow my intuition? Obviously, Steve Jobs got the answer faster than Arjun. He didn't have to hear a lecture from, for 18 chapters from his mentor, but he spent about 7 months in Haridwar and Rishikesh here, going around looking for, the wisdom.
And he didn't even have to see his near and dear ones die.
Exactly, right. Very easier. So that's really, some of the key concepts, but about the very, very starting point of any entrepreneurial venture, which is really the source of creativity. And we all have that source of creativity. And if we are able to tap it, access it, connect it, leverage it, and that would require a really an inside war. And we have to have that courage, and that's why Steve Jobs uses the word courage, and that's what in Mahabharata, Krishna tells Arjuna also about courage, that you got to have the courage to fight. Because in order to listen to your intuition, in order to connect to your creativity, if we do not have the courage to fight our mental beliefs, fears, egos, all of that stuff, we can never break out of that, and we just live a very ordinary life. The second concept that I wanted to talk about was, this higher ideals, higher order ideals and greater purposes. So this is an interesting concept that works very well, whether you're building a great company or you're building a great country. And there are interesting parallels. I'm going to talk about two great businessmen, and then also connect back to the Mahabharata, how this concept relates to. On the left-hand side is the chairman and the founder of SoftBank, which is one of the largest corporations in Japan, and Masayoshi Son. He's actually called the Bill Gates or the Steve Jobs of Japan. That's probably the top 5 richest billionaire, and built a fantastic business. And I've met him several times personally. He was an investor. He was a direct investor in my company. And he told me for over 3 hours his story about how he founded SoftBank. So 30 years back, he's founded SoftBank. And he told me that he had a little office, and he stood on a, like a box, that you fill in with, stuff like this, kind of a paper box or something, plastic box. And he stood on that, and he gave a big speech about what he wants to do with SoftBank, right? The first day when you start a company, you are supposed to lay out a vision or something as a founder. And he told me that he gave a 30-year vision. He said that in 30 years, I want to build SoftBank into a very large company in Japan, and that will make Japan very prosperous, all the Japanese very prosperous. He said when he looked around, he had only 4 employees, including himself. So he was standing on this podium and giving a big speech to like 3 employees and himself. After listening to his speech, one of the employees stood up and said, "But sir, we don't have money to pay the rent for this office. We just got it for from a friend, and you're talking about a 30-year vision. 30 years, we don't know whether we'll survive for 3 months. And by the way, you're talking about making all the Japanese prosperous, and we don't have money. You don't have money to pay me." Okay, so think about this. This is a real story. He himself told me, and this is he's written several books, and they are like more popular in Japan than the Steve Jobs book in Japan, and it's probably documented over there. What it says is that when you have a higher order vision, which is beyond yourself, that it's not about when you are working on something, and it's not about making money for your own self or making whatever, some fame or success for yourself, but if you are having a bigger vision to make the whole country successful, hundreds and thousands of people millionaires, you automatically become successful, because the power, that energy that transmits, it connects in the universe, and the whole universe conspires to make you successful. So people, and there's hundreds and hundreds of examples. The other example that I'd like to give is Jim Stengel, and I met him too. He was the head of marketing at Procter & Gamble, and he's written an excellent book called Grow. And if you have not read it, you should read this book. But long story short on Grow is that he did a research of the top 500 brands in the world, like Coke and Pepsi and Nike and Reebok and Amex and all those different brands, Tata, including everyone globally. And he found out that the top 50 brands in the world that have consistently performed extremely well has given 500 times more returns than the S&P. So if you're betting on S&P, like trying to benchmark your returns on S&P, this 50 brands have outperformed the S&P index, by multiple times over. And the reason, and then he went into the reason that why these brands have been super successful. And the only reason was only one thing. And that one conclusion was that all these brands had a higher order ideal. So they had high ideals. So their ideals was not about making money. Their ideals was not about making them successful. All of that. Their ideal was helping the society or making something helpful or bring happiness to people. Like example, I'm sure you might have heard of Zappos.com, which is an online shoe retailer site. Like Amazon acquired them recently for $1 billion. And think about it. If you're working at Zappos, it's not a very exciting job or a company because at the end of the day, it's not like technology. It's selling shoes, and more than half of the time that people buy the shoes, they're returning it back, right? Because how many times we go to the shoe store and try like 15 different types of shoes, and then finally we select one, and still we think next day that this is not fitting well. Imagine buying it online. So their business is all about the people returning it. And they have this massive call center of people who are just constantly shipping, returning, and think of it, how boring that job could be. Like if you're working for Zappos, right? Every day you're going, you're shipping the shoes. Half of the time there's an angry customer, nasty customer on the phone. Oh, this is a different shoe, and I'm shipping it back, and where's my money back, and refunds and all of that stuff, right? Even though with all that, Zappos employees are rated the best employees. They may build a very, very successful company. And the reason for all that is that they had one big high order ideal. And the ideal was that the CEO, Tony Hsieh, he made an ideal saying that we are not in the business of selling shoes or becoming, rich by selling shoes. Our business is to make people happy. So his business was bringing happiness to people. His business was not about selling shoes. So what happens is that when, like a classic example where, if it is a 5 p.m. or 6 p.m. in the evening and an employee who has to run to whatever, some personal work, has to go out, and then there's a customer calls in, this person is going to take care of the customer first and not feel like, this work is a drudgery and, I have to be here, I'm stuck in this job and I can't go to attend my personal work, because what he or she is feeling inside is that, wow, I'm really making the world happy. I'm making all my customers happy. That giving joy and happiness to others, and if that is driven inside you, that I want to bring joy and happiness to other people, that is going to connect you to that prajna. And then that work, no matter how much you're going to miss your family priority, and still you're going to enjoy sitting in the office until 12 in the night and keep working, because you're thinking that this is more helpful because I'm helping millions of people becoming happy, as opposed to, if I go to that party and there'll be like 5 other people or whatever, 50 other people, right? Same thing. So in 2.45, back to Mahabharata, it's the exact same concept, because it talks about sattva. And sattva is basically that high order ideal. If we have higher order ideal, then what happens is that ideal is so high, and that ideal has so much energy that it pulls you, right? If you have a lower ideal, then if it is lower than yourself, even if it pulls you, you're not growing, right? Even just simple common sense, right? But if you have something here on the ceiling, and if I have something to catch over there, I'm going to jump, and even that is going to help to pull you. So as simple as that. So once you have that source of creativity and whatever you are building on, if you set a very high order ideal beyond yourself, helping the society, then it certainly helps to make you successful. The third concept is about the power of now. So there's again an interesting book called The Power of Now by Eckhart Tolle. I don't know if you guys have read it, but it's a wonderful, wonderful book. Greatest book on the planet. So, but it talks about two things. And so one is the power of one, and then I'm going to go to power of now. But, so in 2.41, it talks about ekaha, which is one, which means, Krishna's mentor, is telling him that the power of one, which is how you can focus on one thing, concentration of the mind. And I think Steve Jobs talked about it in his book too, that one of the way to actually ignite and connect to the prajna is that concentration of the mind. And once you concentrate your mind on one thing and you take away all these other distractions, then the connection with that one goal just makes things happen automatically. A lot of things keeps happening automatically. But the other thing is the power of now. So in 2.47, this is my favorite verse, which is, Karmaniya Vikarasta Maphalesha Parachana, which is this is a great thing, by the way, because this concept tells you that you have to focus now, which means that wherever you are and whatever you are doing, that action, no matter whatever that action is, whether it's sweeping the floor or cleaning the dishes or writing a computer code, doesn't matter. But as long as you're focused and you're doing it right there, that's what is going to generate all the results. But if you try to focus on results, you're not gonna get the full value out of it. So don't focus on results, but focus on the action. And by the way, my tennis coach, he doesn't even know the Bhagavad Gita. He doesn't know a lot of this business theory, because he's just a tennis player throughout his life. He's never even done business. But the first lesson that he told me, the insights, in my very first class for learning tennis, he told me that when you are hitting the ball, you want to focus 100% on just hitting the ball. Never even think, forget about looking, but never even think about where the ball is going to fall in the other court. And even after you hit the ball, right, you hit the ball, you don't want to look at it. Some of the best tennis players, and if you watch on the TV, some of the tennis matches, Wimbledon or US Open, you will see that the best tennis players actually, and then I went back and looked at it, when they hit the ball, they never look at where it went. It's the spectators who are looking at it, whether the ball went in the right place or not. And there's a reason, there's a whole science in tennis, and that's exactly the science here, which is saying you focus on action but not on results. Because when you look at the results, it's going to color your mind, and the mind is going to create all that emotions and ego and fear. If the ball hits, wow, you did a great shot, the next shot is going to be bad because now you're pumped up. You said, okay, I hit a really good shot. If you hit a shot, and if the ball goes in the wrong place or whatever, you are going to internally feel a bad shot. You see how on the TV, some of the players, when they have a bad shot and they have that frustration or that emotion on their face, and so that's what creates a negative emotions, and then your game just goes on a downward spiral. So not looking at the results and not even bothered about where it falls in, but just constantly focusing on the action. That's what 2.47 says, and that's the science across. And by the way, it's also in golf. I don't know how many of you watched this movie, the Legend of the Bag of Vance. You watched it? Oh, fantastic movie! And by the way, this is a movie by Robert Redford, and great director and producer, and it has a great cast. It has Will Smith, Matt Damon, and you should watch it. The whole movie is made on Bhagavad Gita, by the way. He says that. In fact, Bagger Vance means Bhagavan. He turned it Bhagavan into Bagger Vance. And Arjun, as a character who is the golfer, his name is Ajuneya. So Ajuneya is actually Arjun, Ajuneya. Right? So it's kind of a little bit Americanized version. But in that whole movie, what his caddy, who is his mentor, tells this golfer that this golfer was a great golfer and he was the top player, but he kind of lost his game. So what you call here in cricket, like he's out of form or something like that. And then his mentor or his caddy tries to bring him back to the form, and the only thing that he tells him is this. This whole movie is about this, which is saying you have to let go of your own self. You have to hit the ball and connect with the ball one-to-one and let go of yourself. Because the moment you think about yourself, you lost it. The minute you think about yourself when you're hitting the ball, you're not going to get the perfect shot. And it's a great both movie as well as the wisdom in it. The third thing, there's an interesting thing. What's the commonality between the Beatles and the Pandavas? Right? So this is about covering each other's. So Steve Jobs, so he says, my model for business is the Beatles. This is his quote, right? It says there are four guys who kept each other's negative tendencies in check. They balanced each other, and the total was greater than the sum of the parts. If you think of Pandavas, the five brothers, same thing. They kept the negative tendencies of each other. Not everyone were a good archer, right? One guy focused on archery, not everyone. So, and the Beatles did the same thing. They balanced each other out, negative tendencies. So this is another interesting concept to learn or inspire from the Mahabharata, that when you are building something and when you have a team, rather than looking at the team member, whoever, if you're co-founders, if you're 2 or 3 co-founders in the team, rather than looking at each other's negative tendencies, what our job is actually to keep the other's negative tendencies in check and then balance it out, so that overall your team, the value is greater than the sum of its part. Right? So this is another interesting insight. Another Mahabharata insight is, the 13 years of exile. We all know, right? The Pandavas were sent for 13 years in exile, right? 12 years of exile. 13th year, right? They had to go dark, and if they are caught, right, they have to repeat the 13 years, 12 years, right? But it's very similar to like what we call in Silicon Valley, which is like working in the trenches, right? Because that 13 years, it's like grueling, right? Grueling. You have very limited resources. You're wandering in this little whatever jungle or something. They didn't have like a nice house or any money or food or something. They had to build everything from scratch, right? Does it sound like a new entrepreneurial venture where you have to build something from scratch, right? You have no resources. You have no office. You're probably working out of your kitchen or your living room or your bedroom, right? No resources. So same thing. But what they did, so it's interesting that in those 13 years, why they came out to be, actually, if you read that Mahabharata, after that 13th year, they came out to be very powerful, right? They came out to be very powerful because throughout that 13 years, they prepared, and prepared. They did a lot of preparation. And so this trenches, when you are in the trenches and working hard, that prepares you, and it puts so many constraints on you that a lot of time, we see that entrepreneurs, they complain about the constraints, right? And the constraints are whatever, resources, people, money, whatever it is. But to think about it from a positive standpoint, constraints are actually a good thing. Why they're a good thing is because constraints puts limits on you, right? Because you can't do it. Like if you don't have a car, you have to take a train, right? Which are constraints. In some cities actually trains better than car, right? So, but what I'm saying is that it puts automatically constraints on you, and when constraints come in, it limits your number of opportunities because you can't do this, you can't fly first class on the plane. It puts limits on you, and the more it puts limits on you, it takes away all these other options, and what you're left with only one option. What you can do at this time with your two hands and your two legs and whatever resources you have, so automatically it helps you to focus. So it is nature's way of making us focus, because if you have too many resources, it's like sometimes those billionaires' son, right? They never become successful. A lot of billionaires' kids just, they just waste the wealth because they have too many things. They become like, I don't want to name the names. But anyway, so constraints are a great thing, and being in the trenches, focusing on it, taking those limited resources as a positive thing, and then looking at, okay, these are all the things that I can't do because I don't have resources for it. So then what can I do? That is what I have to do, right? So it's very simple. I think we don't need, so if you think from this standpoint, we don't need, and by the way, I'm not against the MBA colleges or things like that, but actually you don't need the fancy MBAs and all this great, even the fancy brand name education and all that stuff. All the answers of what you have to do, how you have to do is all inside. It's all inside us, right? And we can see that here. The other point is, having extraordinary mentors. So Neo had Morpheus, right? Who was telling him when bringing out, that and explaining him who you are, right? And obviously Arjuna had Krishna, but without a great mentor, it is sometimes hard. And this is our Indian tradition, right? The Indian cultural tradition has been going on for 5,000 years. They call the Guru Shishya. And the reason why we have the cultural fabric that has sustained, in an unbroken civilization for 5,000 years, is because of that Guru Shishya connection. Right? And we are all still culturally here very trained to listen to our parents or our grandparents, no matter sometimes how their advice looks like totally stupid thing, right? But we pretend to at least listen, right? Give them respect. So but we have in our society, actually, it is good that we have access to many, many, many mentors. Obviously, the point is that finding the right mentor who can help you. And one of the examples that we give in the Valley is that you can get if you're raising money for your startup, and you can get a lot of dumb investors who can give you very high valuation and millions of dollars. And a lot of those companies fail because, the company will just spend the money. They will hire all this very fancy vice president of this and vice president of that, and they will all fly whatever business class. And a year later, all the investor money is gone, right? On the other hand, if that entrepreneur would have taken money, or not even taken money, but would have had the right mentor, and he or she, that mentor, would have told that person, given the right guidance, that look, we don't need to take this big valuation. Forget the big valuation, which is a very, very difficult advice to give anyone. If somebody's giving you, instead of $5 million, giving you a $10 million valuation, why would you not? But taking that counter intuitive advice and saying that, don't take this valuation, don't take this money. Let's build the business organically, step by step, in the right way. Maybe a year later or 2 years later, that company is far more successful than the company which took money but without mentorship, or without some great board member, or without some great mentor. Right? So, which is called really the quality of the boards, the quality of the investors. And the last point, and then we'll conclude. But after you have successfully achieved everything and have all the material wealth, the very important lesson not to forget is this 2.57, which is that possessing without being possessed, right? Which means that you have all the possessions in the world. Assuming a lot of you guys are or will become millionaires, multi-millionaires, billionaires, right? The important thing about this, 2.57 is how to stay humble, how to surrender your ego, and how to give back to the society. And you can have the possessions, but you don't want to be possessed by it, because again, if you get possessed by those material possession, then you are again caught in this next layer of prison, right? Because we are already this free spirit which has been imprisoned by these layers of the mind. And now the layers of the mind, and then on the top of that, there's another layer of prison, which is all our material possession, relationships, money, whatever, positions, all of that, and that clouds our vision in ability to think very freely. So, 2.57 talks a great deal about it. All the great entrepreneurs, obviously the best example, or the best inspiring model here is Warren Buffett, who was given away 100% of his wealth, worth more than $50 billion, that's going to go away to charity. Right? So there are people today, entrepreneurs in the world, who are living this model, that's been taught in 2.57, and we have this wisdom right here in our country. So I think with that, I would conclude my talk here. Happy to take any Q&A. I hope I didn't exceed the time.
It was great. And like Carl said, I think let's apply this to a business and come up with questions and make this very interactive.
Sal, when you said transcend those three
Mental thought levels.
yeah, how do you transcend it? What is the method?
So if you have a higher goal, let's say a very high goal, which is you want to help the humanity, or millions of people, what would happen is that as soon as you set that goal for